How you all doing? Can you hear me? Thank you, Mikhail, for having me here. It's great to be here. Dystopia is old hat. Tonight I'm just going to be presenting some loose thoughts about how we take it from being kind of from the realm of an architectural entertainment, a ruin porn, a kind of just the cautionary tale, to a way of kind of acting within our present, and in a way kind of instrumentalizing and getting away from just being hanging on the wall of the salon and it being a part of our practice. But it starts here. Buckminster Fuller had the idea that one day all people would be able to rationally argue out their problems with each other, that there would be a rational reallocation of resources as a simple equation of what the earth produces against what the earth consumes. The World Game was the forum for transforming participants to this level of global awareness. And he says, today we have computers that enable us to answer some very big questions if all the relevant data is fed into the computer and all the questions are properly asked. Of course, you're all just anticipating this going wrong, as Buckminster Fuller dreamt of a world where nothing could possibly go wrong, and even the sentence doesn't make it to the end before falling off the page. Dystopia and utopia are two sides of the same coin. Utopia with one fatal flaw is all it takes to be undone. Like a petri dish where mutant strains are isolated to test their effects on willing subjects. Just like Fuller's computer in the movie The Forbin Project, there is a computer called Colossus that is so good that it's bad. In saving humans, it decides that we are our own biggest problem, and so starts to eliminate nations, one nation at a time, all in the name of love. He says, "This is the voice of world control. I bring you peace. It may be the peace of plenty and content, or the peace of unburied love. In time you will come to regard me not only with respect and awe, but with love." Interchangeability of utopia and dystopia are clearly evident in projects like Joop van Lieshout's Slave City, which I'm sure you people in Amsterdam know very well, the model society of orderly production and zero waste, or where citizens are perfectly regimented into a workable and orderly future existence. Or Where the Grass is Greener, a TTT fiction about a community that isolates themselves from the rest of London in order to pursue positive carbon living in the extreme, to the extent that they become an engine of sustainability for the rest of the city. In happy isolation, they have conspired to allow the rest of the city to carry on with their own dirty, polluting liberties. Isolation equals freedom. Altruism becomes a tool of politics. Just as the utopia yearns for the villain, so dystopia creates the setting for the extraordinary to happen. The hero, who's made from the excrement of the world gone wrong, is more ingenious to overcome that regime, to fight the power, like this first box office anti-hero from Escape from LA. That is Kurt Russell in another time. The fictive dystopian world initially offers a compelling setting for conflict, adventure, and room for the hero, or the one who is even more ingenious than the dystopia itself. The hero understands that even the most perfect dystopia is not without its flaws, and that those flaws are there to be exploited. The hero is the one who beats the system at its own game. The hero is the surprise survivor, like the cockroach in the post-nuclear scenario. They are the strange adapter in a twisted ecosystem whose strengths are now exacerbated by new environmental conditions. The dystopia gives birth to its protagonist, and it is that protagonist who needs the dystopia as their raison d'etre, the means of triumphing in the face of an oppressive and hopeless set of circumstances comes from within the system itself. The scenario is instrumentalized in order to demonstrate its own weakness, a dysfunction of the dysfunctional, or a game that demands cheating. In this way, the dystopia is much more than just the setting or the narrative foil, but an active participant in the drama being played out. Those rules become a set of engagement terms to be negotiated. Characters become assets with which to exchange, and the physical space itself becomes something traversed and redeployed in new and novel ways. The fiction is the space where the impossible becomes possible. The rules of the game are merely a skeleton that imply a labyrinth of potentials latent within. It is well-trod territory that dystopian fiction reflects our current society more than being just a scenario about our possible future. It tells about society's norms and our values. And the closer to reality, the more powerful the vision, until future and present are so close that we admit that we live in a kind of proto-dystopia. And that's not just the kind of cautionary tale, but a picture of a modernity that offers progress and excess, the beautiful and the grotesque. I'm not sure if you saw this TV series, Black Mirror, which was a series of vignettes kind of riffing on media culture and our insatiable modern appetite to alter our relationships with ourselves and our environment. Incredibly dark. Charlie Brooker tells of the story of a man trapped in a consumerist roundabout of fitness machines, ubiquitous porn, reality singing contests, and the gamification of his own happiness through accumulating credits from everything from brushing his teeth to watching TV shows. He plots his way out by exposing the world he and all the others are living in, by climbing up this perverse social ladder to make it onto a reality TV show, where in a burst of inspiration, he comes out with an impassioned monologue and holds an audience of avatars absolutely captive. He doesn't know what happens after this, so what happens is that he gets offered a daily half-hour slot on a TV channel, ranting for the sake of his own upward-moving social status. Redemption comes at the price of his own ideals. And here, quite fittingly, as we're talking about architectural criticism later this evening, this commodification of critique maybe perhaps represents the critic's ultimate dystopia. This kind of narrative exposes modernity as a proto-dystopia where a culture of present excesses and imbalances constantly threaten humanity under the Janus-faced guise of progress, whereby we seek excesses of comfort, excesses of health, an excess of leisure, even excess of trade, and perhaps the excess of progress itself, translated into an idea of continual economic growth. If that dystopia holds a mirror to us, then we already live in a kind of proto-dystopia, and that is a kind of blurry haze of modernity where things are poised to tip over with one false move, or some would say things are already bad enough. In proto-dystopia, we keep on living. Dystopia doesn't kill everybody, it just gets weirder. And I guess that's part of the reason why we're talking about the beyond in Beyond Failure. Like the derelict shopping mall that reawakens into a habitat of biodiversity as it returns to a primordial, pre-modern state. Like Las Vegas, a town who opened its doors to unrestricted gambling, but actually only really took off as a viable city after tourists and hotel operators realized that it's a great place to watch atom bomb tests in the Nevada desert. Or Mao Zedong's image of a socialism which was to bring about a creative rebirth, only fared a catastrophic social revolution and an oppressive regime of urbanism, flavorless megablocks. But something that TTT looked at last year was that these have actually, in some parts of China, bred exactly the right kinds of conditions for a creative village so ingenious in its mixing of live and work, so beautifully separate from the rest of the city, and so organically modeled in its model of growth, that you could actually import it back to the UK as a fulfillment of Localism Act legislation that we just introduced there in recent years. These are the unintended consequences of architecture and urbanism, where the actions of designers are so removed from final outcomes that it calls into question our own agency in the transformation of society. And that was really the goal of capital and modernism, if we remember that far. And perhaps that is the downfall of modernism, not that millions were subjected to the failure of inhuman housing estates, but actually that we had no idea that it was going to happen. Dystopia as proposition. This is the project that launched 1,000 ships. Critique becomes urbanism as an instrument. It moves from being just a metaphor for how separation can become a form of urbanism, but actually a real proposal containing a range of spatial techniques. It is a diagram of social relations. Koolhaas and Zengilis's Exodus, voluntary prisoners of architecture, posits society not based on connectivity but separation, urbanism not on openness but closure, fulfillment not through any kind of higher ideology but through total subjugation, and freedom ultimately not through free will but through slavery. If morality and consequences can become so entangled, have we now flattened the differences between being the naive optimist or the nihilistic dystopian? And can we now find a way of negotiating our modern world between those two polar extremes? One where the dystopian impulse actually fuels active engagement with our modern world, where the dystopia itself contains the rules of engagement. We can now put forward a dystopia as more material to make incursions into our modern world and be led to new places. And I guess this is where I'm getting at, the idea of a dystopia as a generator, or a dystopia being some kind of productive force. As one of my students worked a couple of years ago, the mega creative factory, which was a blindly pragmatic way of describing a mega factory comprising parallel kilometre-long production lines along an abandoned rail yard. This clumsy Fordist nightmare used quantity as a tool to approach an all-pervasive logistical logic, the capitalist logic, a tool to generate a kind of friction and dynamism between productive processes that paradoxically gives it sociable qualities. Traversing the factories, one production line becomes randomly intertwined with others, polluting the purity of a single production manufacturing process and leading to surprising hybridized outcomes. A productive dystopia approaches the logics of capitalism and proposes the equivalent of an architectural atonement, a mutant strain that turns its biological logic against itself. Is that what constitutes a productive dystopia? Hopefully we'll pick that up later on. But a postscript from J.G. Ballard from his novel High Rise, a novel which sets a building as its main protagonist, a fiction in which a luxury building has gone fatally wrong, has failed. It's the architect's pure vision of the city and sky, a 40-story tower housing 2,000 people, replete with shopping centre, kindergartens, and swimming pools, that descends into class-based warfare, cannibalism, murder, incest, revenge. Residents let primitive instincts take over while silently conspiring to remain in the building until the first fulfillment of a new society emerges. And it's this kind of transformative quality that I kind of want to end on if we talk about dystopia. Dr. Robert Lang is one of the main protagonists who emerges the other side of dystopia as a renewed being, not in spite of, but precisely through the power of the dystopia. Lang knew that he was far happier now than ever before, despite all the hazards of his life. This is after he's ascended through a gory pile of bodies and worked his way up to the top of the building. The likelihood that he would die at any time from hunger or assault, despite all of the hazards of his life, the likelihood that he would die at any time from hunger or assault. He was satisfied by his self-reliance, his ability to cope with the tasks of survival, foraging, keeping his wits about him, guarding his 2 women from any marauder who might want to use them for similar purposes. Above all, he was pleased with his good sense in giving rein to those impulses that involved him with Eleanor and his sister, perversities created by the limitless possibilities of the high rise. That serves as a picture of taking dystopia from the level of critique cautionary tale and seeing within it the very materials and methods that might point to a way of approaching or determining modern existence. We go from a future dystopia to an alternative present.